Hello, I'm Pastor Katrina Lottie here at Homer City United Methodist Church in Western Pennsylvania. This morning we're going to be reading from Genesis chapter 24. Verse 34. So he said, I am Abraham's servant. The Lord has blessed my master abundantly, and he has become wealthy. He has given him sheep and cattle, silver and gold, men servants and maidservants, and camels and donkeys. My master's wife Sarah has borne him a son in her old age, and he has given him everything he owns. And my master made me swear an oath and said, You must not get a wife for my son from the daughters of the Canaanites in whose land I live, but go to my father's family and to my own clan, and get a wife for my son. Then I asked my master, What if a woman will not come back with me? He replied, The Lord, before whom I have walked, will send his angel with you and make your journey a success, so that you can get a wife for my son from my own clan and from my father's family. Then, when you go to my clan, you will be released from my oath, even if they refuse to give her to you. You will be released from my oath. When I came to the spring today, I said, O Lord, God of my master Abraham, if you will, please grant success to this journey on which I have come. See, I am standing beside this spring. If a maiden comes out to draw water, and I say to her, Please let me drink a little water from your jar, and if she says to me, Drink, and I'll water your camels as well, let her be the one the Lord has chosen for my master's son. Before I finished praying in my heart, Rebekah came out with her jar on her shoulder. She went down to the spring and drew water, and I said to her, Please give me a drink. She quickly lowered her jar from her shoulder and said, Drink, and I'll water your camels too. So I drank, and she watered the camels also. I asked her, Whose daughter are you? She said, The daughter of Bethuel, son of Nahor, whom Milcah bore to him. Then I put the ring in her nose and the bracelets on her arms, and I bowed down and worshipped the Lord. I praised the Lord, the God of my master Abraham, who had led me on the right road to get the granddaughter of my master's brother for his son. Now if you will show kindness and faithfulness to my master, tell me, and if not, tell me, so that I may know which way to turn. Laban and Bethuel answered, This is from the Lord. We can say nothing to you one way or the other. Here is Rebekah. Take her and go, and let her become the wife of your master's son, as the Lord has directed. When Abraham's servant heard what they said, he bowed down to the ground before the Lord. Then the servant brought out gold and silver jewelry and articles of clothing and gave them to Rebekah. He also gave costly gifts to her brother and to her mother. Then he and the men who were with him ate and drank and spent the night there. But when her brother and mother replied, Let the girl remain with us 10 days or so, then you may go. But he said to them, Do not detain me, now that the Lord has granted success to my journey. Send me on my way so that I may go with my master. Then they said, Let's call this girl and ask her about it. So they called Rebekah and asked her, Will you go with this man? I will go, she said. So they sent their sister Rebekah on her way, along with the nurse and Abraham's servant and his men. And they blessed Rebekah and said to her, Our sister, may you increase to thousands upon thousands. May your offspring possess the gates of their enemies. Then Rebekah and her maids got ready and mounted their camels and went back with the man. So the servant took Rebekah and left. Now Isaac had come from Be'er Lahai-roi, for he was living in Negev. He went out to the field one evening to meditate, and as he looked up, he saw camels approaching. Rebekah also looked up and saw Isaac. She got down from her camel and asked the servant, Who is that man in the field coming to meet us? He is my master, the servant answered. So she took her veil and covered herself. Then the servant told Isaac all he had done. Isaac brought her into the tent of his mother Sarah, and he married Rebekah. So she became his wife, and he loved her, and Isaac was comforted after his mother's death. This week starts my 7th year here at Homer City United Methodist Church. It is my 13th year in full-time ministry. I was talking with someone about this week, and remembering back to my first day here at Homer City. On the one hand, I was immensely excited. I was excited about beginning ministry in this community and joining the active ministry that this church was known for. I was excited about moving into the beautiful parsonage. I was excited about living in a town rather than way out in the country, like I used to live in my former appointment. I was, of course, nervous as well. I didn't know for sure how I would fit in here. I didn't know what challenges would lie ahead, and if I was up for those challenges. I didn't know how it would be following in Pastor Joe's place, or whether I would be accepted by the people. There was no way to know. And I was mourning. I was mourning the loss of my children who had moved to Knoxville just a few months earlier. I was mourning my last appointment that held so many memories and relationships for me. I was mourning moving away from what was familiar and had become comfortable. It was hard to say goodbye and to close the chapter on my last appointments. In today's story, Isaac is around 40 years old. He was very close with his mother, Sarah. At age 127, she died. Abraham, the patriarch, was now 140 years old. What had been his calling as the father of a nation and all of his responsibilities were being handed over to his son Isaac. Now, it was not common for a man of 40 to not be married, but for whatever reason, that was the case with Isaac. Perhaps Abraham had assumed God would bring some young woman from his kindred to Isaac. But when that had not happened, and Abraham was not sure how much longer he would be alive, he sent his servant back to Abraham's hometown to find someone for his son. And of course, God provided. And considering that Isaac and Rebekah had never met before and really had little say in the marriage, both seemed quite happy with the arrangement. I am certain that Isaac and Rebekah were both going through the same emotions I went through on my first day here at Homer City. First, they were excited. Isaac was so excited that he took Rebekah as his wife right away. Rebekah fell in love with one look, not even knowing at that moment that that attractive man was the man who was to be her husband. It was the beginning of an exciting journey for both of them, and appeared to be a perfect match. But of course, they would have also been apprehensive. Isaac taking Rebekah into his mother's tent meant that they were now the patriarch and matriarch of the nation. The mantle was being handed on to them, and that mantle was very heavy. They would have many descendants and much success, but there would also be great fighting and oppression. There would be great joy, but also great heartache. And lastly, there would have been much grieving. For Isaac to take a woman into his mother's tent meant that his mother was truly gone. That is the heart-wrenching thing about stepping into the shoes of one who has gone before us. It requires saying goodbye again on a whole new level. For Isaac, it meant that a chapter in his life had truly ended. For Rebekah, it must have been worse. Yes, she willingly went with the servant to be with Isaac. And we learn later that her brother Laban was not particularly a nice guy. But even if she had been unhappy at home, and we certainly don't know that she was unhappy, saying goodbye to everyone and everything one knows and is familiar with is difficult. And it's not like back then they had the ability to FaceTime or even to talk on the phone or to jump in a car or go visit one another from 500 miles away. How hard it would have been for Rebekah to say goodbye to her parents, not knowing if she would ever see them again. When I received the call from the DS 7 years ago, I knew that it was a call from God, telling me that it was time to move on, to do something new, to step into a new chapter in my life. Of course, I had no way of knowing that soon after I moved here, my dad would be diagnosed with cancer and then die a year later, or of knowing that a pipe would burst in my mother's house and she would need to come live with me for a while. And I had no idea that my boys and their family would move up here just a few years after that. But I knew that God knew what he was doing. And God put me at just the right place, at just the right time, and provided the resources I needed to get through the difficult situations that would arise. For Rebekah and Isaac, it was clear that God's hand was upon them. It was way more than a coincidence that the signs the servants asked for from God just happened to come true through Rebekah. And God would continue to prove his presence and provision to Isaac and Rebekah over and over throughout their lives. In our lives, there are often times when we have to accept the closing of one chapter and be willing to step into another chapter in our lives. We don't like to have to do that. Often we will keep living so much in the past that we are not able to move ahead. There was a woman in my last parish who had cared for her granddaughter while her granddaughter fought cancer and then died. Soon after, her husband was diagnosed with the same rare form of cancer, and she cared for him until he died. And I don't know that I ever had a conversation with her where she did not talk about her granddaughter or her husband. It had become a part of her identity. In fact, when I first met her, she introduced herself as the woman who had had a granddaughter and husband who had had cancer, who she had cared for until they died. When I met the woman, the granddaughter and husband had been gone for 12 years. Now, of course, the granddaughter and the husband would continue to have a huge place in this woman's heart and life, but she was never willing to move on beyond their deaths. I think she felt guilty, like if she were happy or moving forward in her life, it would somehow be a betrayal to them. I'm not sure. But all I know is that her refusal to close one chapter in her life kept her from being able to move forward into other chapters in her life. I hear people all the time talk about how things in their life have changed. And yes, that is the way life is. We're dealt with a certain deck of cards in our lives, but with new chapters comes a new hand, a new set of cards. If we continue to hold on, wishing that we had the same set of cards that we had been dealt before, then we will never be able to play the cards we are currently dealt. Pastor Harold Hicks works with us at Celebrate Recovery. His wife, Patty, has recently been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. Now, the prognosis for her is better than it is for many people. They are certainly fighting the cancer with all that they have. But there were many things that they had wanted to do that they cannot do now. And there are many things that they were doing but can no longer do now. They have no way of knowing what the outcome may be. But instead of dwelling on the last chapter of their lives, they are living presently in the current chapter, making the best of life as it is for them now. One of the things I often hear people say is that they cannot do what they used to be able to do. Well, that's what happens as we get older. But too many people just stop doing anything because they can't do what they used to be able to do. But God does not put an age limit or an ability limit on living. As long as you are here on earth, God is writing a new chapter in your life, inviting you to be a part of God's work on this earth as it is in heaven with whatever resources you have right now. God doesn't say, oh, you can't serve on 3 committees and go on mission trips and babysit the kids and work all the dinners anymore, so I can no longer use you. No. God says, I have given you abilities in the here and now. They may not be what you used to do, but they are gifts that are to be used to glorify me. And no matter how small the gifts seem, God can use those gifts in mighty ways. Pastors sometimes joke about how people in the church don't like to change. Sometimes we say, oh yes, you know the 7 last words of Jesus on the cross. We've never done it that way before. One of the biggest reasons churches are dying now is because they have failed to be relevant. People feel like there is a certain way that church has been done for the last 100 years, and we cannot deviate from that. It was good enough for them, so it must be good enough for the rest of us. That's not the way things work. Things change. People change. The way God is working in the world changes. The way that people can relate to God changes. Culture changes. And if we spend all our energy mourning the fact that 200 people used to come here every Sunday and now we only have 50, or saying that we have to do things just the way we've always done them because that's the only right way to do it, then we cannot live in the current chapter that God is writing in our lives. We cannot move forward if we are chained to the past. Now let me be clear. I love history. I love tradition. The Bible is richly filled with traditions and rituals. These are important things. Most of our rituals and liturgy come from the Book of Common Prayer. Do you know when that was written? It was written in the 1500s, and then it was used by John Wesley in the 1700s. It is steeped in history and tradition, but the rituals have been updated to meet modern times. The old language has been changed. Certain things have been taken out, like a bride saying she will obey her husband. We've adapted the rituals to maintain the same deep tie to our tradition while making them relevant to the current time. Isaac certainly held on to his community's traditions, but at the same time, new traditions were formed. There was a deep tie to the past, but also a great stride toward the future. We can always look back at the past chapters of our lives, looking at our memories as though they were a scrapbook. In fact, memories are deeply important. It is important to remember and to celebrate what was. That is why we have birthdays and anniversaries and other holiday celebrations. That is why we have reunions and why we tell stories at funerals. But if all we do is to look back, then we can never move forward as individuals, as a community, or as a nation. In his letter to the Philippians, Paul said this, "Forgetting what is behind and straining toward what is ahead, I press on toward the goal to win the prize of the heavenly calling in Jesus Christ." You can't go back and undo the mistakes you've made. You can't go back and make different choices. And you can't go back and relive all the great events of your life. You have to realize that that chapter has ended. And you have to now ask God, what now? Like many of you, sometimes I fear change, drastically. I look at old pictures and long for what was, or I think of old mistakes I've made and still carry some guilt over them. Moving into the unknown is scary. Not knowing what the future of the United Methodist Church is scares me. But I know that if I just keep looking at things in the past and longing for them and grieving over them, then I can never be fully present in the now. Spending too much time looking behind keeps us from fully embracing the blessings and joy that surround us today and will be waiting for us tomorrow. A part of me worries about growing older. Will I be all alone? Will there be anyone to care for me? Will I just be dropped off in some nursing home somewhere, left to mourn over the memories of the past? I think about these things. And then God smacks me upside the head and says to me that it will only be that way if I make the choice for it to be that way. I can sit in my wheelchair and be grumpy and sad, or I can live the current chapter I'm in and reach out to others who are lonely and struggling. I can be sad because of what I've lost, or I can focus on serving God with whatever I have right then, which will gain me many, many blessings. So as one chapter in your life comes to an end, know that an ending is really just a beginning. Only when one chapter ends can another begin. So whatever your circumstances are, be sure to live your life to the fullest in the now, with whatever skills you currently have, with whatever resources you possess now, and with whatever circumstances you live with in the present. Because, as Doctor Who once said, we're all just stories in the end. So make it a good one.